$9 billion. That was the valuation of a company whose flagship product didn't work, not for a single day, from the moment it was founded to the moment it was shut down. And that isn't even the most shocking part. The most shocking part is that the people inside the company knew. The engineers knew. The lab techs knew. The COO knew. The founder knew. And every single morning, they all badged in, sat at their desks, and kept pretending that everything was fine. For 11 years. October 2014, a conference stage in California. A young woman in a black turtleneck stands under the spotlights, holding a tiny plastic cylinder between her thumb and forefinger. It's the size of a vitamin capsule. She stares into the audience, unblinking. She speaks in a deep, almost masculine baritone, not the voice she was born with, but one she deliberately engineered, because a lower pitch commands authority. That's a well-known fact in the psychology of negotiation. She tells the crowd that this tiny capsule will change medicine forever. She claims that the little black box on the table next to her, named the Edison, a very deliberate nod to the great inventor, is capable of running over 200 complex blood tests from a single microdrop pricked from a finger. No needles in your vein, no syringes, no centralized labs. Right there at your local pharmacy in 20 minutes. Results sent straight to your phone. A revolution in diagnostics, the democratization of healthcare, a technology that will save millions of lives because people will catch diseases long before they have time to develop. The audience gives her a standing ovation. At this exact moment, Theranos is valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes is the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world, according to Forbes. She is 30 years old. Her board of directors includes 2 former U.S. Secretaries of State, a 4-star Marine general who will soon become Secretary of Defense, and dozens of the most powerful men in America. Walgreens, the largest pharmacy chain in the country, is already rolling out Theranos blood draw wellness centers inside its stores.
Real patients are giving real blood, receiving real results, and making real, life-altering medical decisions based on them. Stop. Go back to that black box on the stage, to the Edison, to the technology that will change medicine forever. Inside that box, at this very moment, is a broken robotic arm. The mechanism designed to process micro drops of blood is overheating, glitching, and literally smearing biomatter across the plastic instead of analyzing it. Theranos' proprietary technology cannot perform a single one of the 200 promised tests with the accuracy required for clinical use. This isn't a trade secret. It isn't a minor bug waiting for a software patch. It is physics. And the laws of physics don't change, no matter how convincingly you speak in a fake baritone on a TED stage. Here is what was actually happening. The real tests, the ones handed to Walgreens patients, the ones doctors were using to prescribe treatments, were being run in the basement of Theranos headquarters in Palo Alto, on standard, bulky commercial machines made by Siemens, which the company had secretly bought through shell corporations to hide their origin. The exact same massive laboratory machines that Holmes was publicly promising to make obsolete. The gap between what she was saying on stage and what was happening in her basement was exactly $9 billion, and the lives of the people who received the wrong diagnoses. But before we can understand how this worked, we need to understand how she built it. Because a $9 billion illusion doesn't just materialize out of thin air. It requires a system. And this system was constructed with a precision that a master architect would envy. Elizabeth Holmes got into Stanford at 19, chemical engineering. She was a bright student with one specific trait that her professors noted in various contexts. She understood people far better than she understood chemistry. Not in the sense of empathy, in the sense of mechanics, how people make decisions, what drives them, where their blind spots are. At 19, she dropped out of Stanford. Not because she had invented a revolutionary technology. There was no technology. There wouldn't be for years. And in a very real sense, there never would be. She dropped out because she had invented something far more valuable to Silicon Valley than a working product. She invented an image. She didn't pitch her first investors with a prototype. She pitched them with a story. The narrative was simple and bulletproof. Her beloved uncle had died of cancer, a cancer that could have been caught early if blood testing had been cheaper and more accessible. She wanted to change that. One prick of a finger instead of a needle in the arm. This wasn't just a business, it was a crusade. The first checks cleared, then the next. The machine roared to life. You have to understand the environment where this took place. Silicon Valley in the early 2000s ran on a beautifully vague concept known as vision. Venture capitalists weren't funding things that existed, they were funding things that would exist. FOMO, the fear of missing out on the next Amazon or Apple, was the supreme engine of venture capital. And that inherently isn't fraud. Apple, Google, Amazon, they all went through a phase where their product was little more than a promise.
But Holmes applied this playbook to an industry where it worked with terrifying efficiency: healthcare. Because in healthcare, fear is a vastly more powerful motivator than greed. The fear of illness, the fear of not knowing, the fear of finding out too late. An investor who puts money into a software startup is afraid of losing his cash. An investor who puts money into a medical startup is afraid of losing his cash and looking like the guy who could have saved millions of lives but was too cheap to write the check. Holmes understood this perfectly, and she weaponized it. Now let's look at the board of directors, because this is a standalone story that teaches you more about the nature of power than any political science textbook. Sitting on the board of a medical startup developing revolutionary biochemical tech were Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, in his 90s; George Shultz, former Secretary of State, in his 80s; James Mattis, Marine General, future Secretary of Defense; William Perry, former Secretary of Defense; Richard Kovacevic, former CEO of Wells Fargo. Not a single biochemist. Not a single expert in laboratory diagnostics. Not a single person with a medical degree.
This wasn't a failure in recruiting. It was a conscious, calculated choice by Holmes. The men on that list shared one common trait. They were used to making decisions that affected millions of people, based entirely on briefings from subordinates. They were conditioned to trust the packaging, the confidence of the delivery, the respectability of the setting, more than the actual raw data. Holmes spoke their language, the language of national security, legacy, and the democratization of healthcare. She wasn't asking for money. She was inviting them to make history. She wore a black turtleneck, just like Steve Jobs, and it is a documented fact that she deliberately modeled her visual aesthetic on Jobs because visual associations bypass analytical thinking entirely. Not a single one of these men asked to see a working device undergo independent third-party vetting. Not a single one asked why a $9 billion company was hiding its tech from the scientific community instead of publishing its findings in peer-reviewed medical journals. Generals who verify everything verified absolutely nothing. Because being in a room with Holmes made you feel like doubting her was a sign of intellectual weakness, a lack of vision, small-mindedness. That is the absolute masterclass of manipulation, making the victim feel honored just to be in your presence. Now, let's go inside, into the Theranos building in Palo Alto, behind the sleek facade. The headquarters was designed like a black site fortress. Bulletproof glass in the conference rooms, officially for security, practically so no one outside could hear what was being said inside. Security guards escorted engineers everywhere, even to the bathroom. Departments were utterly siloed. The engineers didn't know what the chemists were doing, the chemists didn't know what the software devs were doing. Nobody saw the big picture except two people. One was Holmes. The other was Sunny Balwani. Ramesh Sunny Balwani was Holmes's business partner and secret boyfriend, 20 years her senior. They met when she was 18. He became the president and COO of Theranos. If Holmes was the face, inspiring, persuading, raising capital, Balwani was the enforcer, ensuring nobody on the inside asked questions. Here is a specific scene, reconstructed from the sworn testimony of former employees. It's 2013, the Theranos lab. A young engineer, 26 years old, discovers that running the exact same blood sample through the Edison machine multiple times yields a 30% variance in the results. 30% is not a margin of error. It means the machine is equally likely to tell you that you have diabetes or that you are perfectly healthy, based on the exact same blood, depending entirely on the minute you press the button. The engineer writes an internal report. He documents the flaw, he attaches the graphs. The next morning, Balwani calls him into his office. The meeting lasts 4 minutes. Balwani tells him exactly one sentence. You either believe in this company or you don't. The engineer is fired that same day. Security escorts him to the door. His personal belongings are mailed to him later.
This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the system. Anyone who questioned the scientific validity of the technology was fired. Anyone who tried comparing notes with other departments was threatened. Several people were fired simply for documenting accuracy failures. It wasn't viewed as professionalism. It was treated as treason. In an environment like that, people do one of two things. They quit, or they shut up and do what they're told. Most of them shut up. And here is what they were told to do. When the Edison fails to produce a result, dilute the blood sample with saline and run it through the commercial Siemens machine. When the Siemens machine gives a result that doesn't match the expected range, run it again and take the average. When the average still looks highly suspicious, mark it as valid and send it to the patient.
Stop for a second. Read that last sentence again. Mark it as valid and send it to the patient. That isn't a blood test. That is a random number generator printed on a medical letterhead. And those numbers were handed to living, breathing human beings who took them to real doctors who made real medical decisions based on them. Diluting the blood with saline utterly destroyed the accuracy of the test. The Siemens machines were calibrated for normal vials of venous blood, not a microdrop from a finger diluted with salt water. The software on the Siemens machines was hacked and modified, so the official printout wouldn't reveal that the test was run on commercial hardware instead of Theranos' proprietary tech. Everybody knew. Nobody spoke. In 2013, Theranos signed the deal with Walgreens, and this was the Rubicon. Once they crossed it, everything changed.
Before Walgreens, it was wire fraud, defrauding investors, rich people losing money. It's bad, but it's just money. After Walgreens, it became medical fraud. Fraud against patients. People who didn't come in to invest in a startup. They came in to find out if they had cancer. One patient received a PSA test result, a marker for prostate cancer, that was terrifyingly high. His doctor immediately ordered a prostate biopsy. It is a painful, invasive procedure with real risks. The biopsy found zero trace of cancer. A follow-up test at a legitimate lab showed his PSA levels were perfectly normal. That man spent weeks believing he had cancer, based entirely on a random number spit out by a broken machine in the basement of a Silicon Valley startup. A pregnant woman received results indicating she was miscarrying. She spent hours in absolute agony, convinced she had lost her baby. A subsequent ultrasound proved the baby was perfectly fine. But those hours of sheer terror, they happened. You cannot give that time back. You cannot compensate for it with a settlement check. You cannot explain it away as early-stage technological imperfections. These weren't outliers. Theranos results deviated from certified lab results by clinically dangerous margins across dozens of different tests. It was a systemic failure. Holmes knew about these cases. She specifically knew. It is documented in internal emails recovered during the federal investigation. And she kept giving cover interviews to Forbes, kept standing on stages holding the nanotainer, kept speaking in that deep voice about her mission to change healthcare. Now, let's look at a story that illustrates the depth of this illusion better than any financial statistic ever could. It shows that the $9 billion wasn't the steepest price paid for Theranos.
Tyler Schultz joined the company in 2013, a young biologist, 22 years old. His grandfather was George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State and one of the most revered members of the Theranos Board of Directors. Tyler came to work for a company that his own grandfather considered his ultimate legacy project in retirement. A few months in the lab gave Tyler an undeniable realization. The results were being faked, not through technical glitches, systematically and deliberately. He filed an internal complaint, ignored. So he went to his grandfather. This conversation is a scene worthy of Shakespeare. If you understand Shakespeare not as pretty monologues, but as a brutal depiction of how power destroys human bonds.
Tyler laid the documents on his grandfather's desk. Hard data. Comparisons of Theranos results against certified lab results using the exact same samples. Numbers, not interpretations. Hard numbers. George Shultz looked at his grandson and told him he was wrong. Then he called Elizabeth Holmes. Holmes sent her lawyers. The lawyers explained to Tyler that if he continued spreading defamatory information about the company, he would be sued into oblivion. Tyler quit Theranos. The company's legal team hunted him relentlessly. The legal fees pushed his family to the brink of bankruptcy. In his own words, the paranoia was so deep he slept with a knife under his pillow. Not a metaphor, literally. A 22-year-old kid showed his grandfather the raw data. And the grandfather, a statesman who had served his country for 50 years, a man who had negotiated with Gorbachev, a man widely considered one of America's great wise men, chose to believe Holmes. Not because he was stupid, he wasn't stupid. Because admitting his grandson was right meant admitting that he, a titan of statecraft, had been played for a fool, that his legendary name had been used as window dressing, that his presence on the board provided zero oversight, it only provided legitimacy, that he had sold a half-century of hard-earned reputation just for the intoxicating feeling of being part of something world-changing. For an 80-year-old statesman, that is an impossibly high psychological price to pay. Theranos didn't collapse because of government regulators. It wasn't brought down by an FBI raid. It was destroyed by one journalist, and one doctor whom that journalist had never met before. Before John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal ever spoke to former Theranos employees, before he had any insider sources, there was one phone call. A pathologist from a small town in the Midwest. Not a professor, not a celebrity. Just a doctor who read a glowing profile of Theranos in a medical journal and called the newsroom with one sentence. You cannot run 200 tests on a single drop of capillary blood. It violates the laws of physics. Not the laws of business, not regulatory guidelines. The laws of physics. An absolute, unbreakable ceiling that does not care about your charisma, your black turtleneck, or your $9 billion valuation.
The name of that doctor doesn't appear in the public limelight. The man who tipped the first domino that crushed a $9 billion empire? We barely know who he is. Carreyrou started digging. Holmes found out about the investigation. Her lawyers bombarded the newsroom. She personally met with the top executives at News Corp. The threats were relentless. Think about that. The founder of a company accused of faking medical tests tried to stop a journalistic investigation not by providing proof that her tech worked, but by threatening to sue the newspaper for daring to check if it worked. The article dropped in October 2015. The next day, the Theranos valuation began to disintegrate. Walgreens froze their partnership. Regulators swooped in. Former employees started talking. $9 billion turned into zero. In 2022, a federal jury found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. The sentence? 11 years in federal prison. Balwani got nearly 13 years in a separate trial. Tyler Schultz testified at the trial. His grandfather, George Schultz, eventually turned against Holmes as well. By then, the old man was a centenarian. He died in 2021, before the final verdict. We don't know what he thought in his final months. We don't know if he ever admitted, even to himself, that his grandson was right from day one, that the numbers were the numbers, that a 22-year-old biologist saw clearly what a Secretary of State refused to see.
We only know this. He eventually cooperated with the authorities against Holmes. It was one of his last public acts. You can view it as a confession. You can view it as an attempt to make amends. You can view it as exactly what it probably was, the action of a man who figured it out way too late, but eventually figured it out. And here is the fact that gets left out of the slick Theranos documentaries. At the moment Holmes was exposed, Silicon Valley was home to more than 300 unicorns, startups valued at over $1 billion. According to analysts at CB Insights, over 40% of them lacked a sustainable business model, and a significant chunk did not have a fully functioning product in the way they had pitched it to investors. Theranos wasn't a glitch in the Matrix. Theranos was the ultimate, logical extreme of the exact system that created and rewarded it.
Silicon Valley is built on the gospel of fake it till you make it. It isn't a fringe philosophy. It is mainstream business culture. It legitimizes lying by renaming it pitching, vision, and disruption. In this culture, the difference between a visionary genius and a convicted felon comes down to a single factor. Did you manage to make the product work before the investors asked to see it? If you do, you're Steve Jobs. If you don't, you're Elizabeth Holmes. There isn't a moral chasm between the two. The only difference is the timeline. Most of the people in this story weren't villains in the classic sense. The investors weren't idiots. They were rational actors in an incentive structure that punishes caution and rewards betting on the impossible. The employees weren't accomplices. Most were young people bullied and isolated into a state of paranoia where silence felt like the only survival strategy.
The board members weren't corrupt. They were elderly men intoxicated by the belief that their presence was aiding a noble cause. Only 2 people in this story saw the full, unvarnished picture and consciously chose to keep lying. One of them is sitting in federal prison, so is the other. $9 billion vaporized. Patients who received false diagnoses, some only found out years later by reading the newspaper. There was no grand compensation. The lawsuits dragged on for years. Carey-Rue wrote a bestseller. The pathologist remained largely anonymous. The Edison machine never worked. The nanotainer, the tiny capsule Holmes held between her fingers, was a real physical object that effectively did nothing.
The black turtleneck still exists. Holmes wore it to court. And here is the final question. The one neither the investigation, nor the jury, nor Holmes herself ever truly answered. Was she a cold-blooded sociopath who knew from day one that she was selling an empty box? Or was she a true believer, utterly convinced that the technology would eventually work if she just bought enough time and poured enough money into it? A person who crossed moral lines one by one, not because she was evil, but because the venture capital system she operated in has no mechanism for admitting failure without total annihilation? Because in Silicon Valley, there is no phrase for, "I was wrong, here's your money back." There is only, "We are on the verge of a breakthrough." And you say that until the breakthrough either happens or the FBI knocks on your door.
If the second theory is true, if Holmes wasn't an anomaly, but the ultimate product of the system, then who is accountable for a system designed to operate exactly like that? A system that continues to operate exactly like that, even after an 11-year sentence was handed down in a San Jose courtroom. Even right now, while you are listening to this. Right now, somewhere in Silicon Valley, someone is standing on a stage, probably wearing a black turtleneck, probably holding something very small between their fingers, speaking in a confident, engineered voice about how they are going to change the world. Maybe they will. Or maybe, inside the black box on the table next to them, there is absolutely nothing. And 10 years from now, we'll be making a video about them.